Who needs defense when you can recruit 3 blue chip wide receivers in the span of 3 days? Of course, I'm just kidding about that part, because if you do that, Ohio State fans get what they got last year, and they want to be better than that, as they should be. But nonetheless, in the modern era of college football, which is a more quarterback, wide receiver type of game than it has ever been, this feat is impressive, and we have to talk about it. Getting Noah Rogers, Brandon Inniss, and Carnell Tate all in the span of 3 days. If you specifically break it down, it was the 20th and the 22nd. So really in 2 days, the 21st just being the singular rest day between 3 huge commits, I guess. Carnell Tate on the 20th and Brandon Inniss and Noah Rogers on the 22nd. This moved Ohio State's 2023 recruiting class up from near the 10 spot, I forget exactly where it is, but up to currently the number 2 spot. The current recruiting ranking, after all, is all that matters. All that matters really is not just even the current recruiting ranking, but where you finish at the end of the year. These 3 commits also moved Brian Hartline up to the number 1 spot for the 2023 football recruiter rankings, according to 24/7 Sports. His average commit is ranked as a 96.53. He has a total of 77.77 points to Ohio State's recruiting class. And just looking at that, that is over 1/4 of Ohio State's recruiting class points are from Brian Hartline, which to me is just absolutely impressive. It speaks volumes as to how good of a recruiter he is. I think he's the best wide receivers coach in the country, and there are several good, great, elite wide receivers coaches. But just the fact that this guy was a graduate assistant in 2017, he got the interim wide receiver coach position because of the incidents surrounding Zach Smith. So in a certain sense, he was promoted pretty quickly, handed a challenge, possibly earlier than he even anticipated, and he worked his way up to the position being made his permanently in 2018. 2019, Ohio State had a really good year. 2020, the receiving core got even better. And in 2021, the receiving core was, in my opinion, at its best, as you had nearly 3 1,000-yard wide receivers and nearly 3 wide receivers with 10 or more receiving touchdowns, those being Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson, and Chris Olave. And of course, there are others as well that Brian Hartline has recruited, not just those guys who are great players who could start at a plethora of other schools, whether that's Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison, Julian Fleming when he's healthy, etc. This guy just works and recruits, and it bears results, honestly. This success, Ohio State has seen it before. I think you saw it in, the 2021 recruiting class when you had Travion Henderson, GT Tuimalau, Jack Sawyer, Donovan Jackson, and Emeka Egbuka was in that class too, when you had that many 5-star wide receivers and had an insane average player ranking, but specifically for getting great wide receivers and for specifically this amount of wide receiver recruiting is unprecedented, and it's impressive. So I wanted to start off today's video with that. This is just talking about Ohio State's, recruiting success in this area. We're first going to go over these commits. Noah Rogers, Brandon Inniss, Carnell Tate. That's going to be the main portion of this episode. We're going to move on and just talk about the 3 main guys of last year's team, which will just show how good of a developer Brian Hartline is. But since you've heard me talk about them, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, JSN, for so long, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but it still needs to be talked about to reinforce just how good of a wide receivers coach this guy is. And the fact that it further helps Ohio State that Brian Hartline played for Ohio State. He was born in Ohio. He had a good NFL good NFL career. He has connections to this university. So I don't really see him. I don't see him leaving. I mean, Ohio State wants him. He wants Ohio State. They promoted him to passing game coordinator in 2021. They're probably going to give him another raise if Ohio State does what I think they do this year and win the national title or get close to it. And Jackson Smith-Njigba is a first-round pick. So it's just, to me, it's phenomenal. And it just goes to show that even after a down year, Ohio State's just one of these schools that Ohio State's always good at recruiting. They always have great recruiters on their staff. They have a fantastic reputation there. And it's just, it's going to help them reload and rebuild. And having Brian Hartline recruiting at this level and being the developer that he is part of the reason, that I don't think, it's actually the main reason, why I don't think Ohio State's wide receiving core is going to take a huge step back, or much of a step back, despite the departure of 2 first-round wide receivers. Because you still have Jackson Smith-Njigba there, and I think Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison, or Julian Fleming, likely the former 2 instead of the latter 1, can plug in. They're not going to immediately be the same as those 2 phenomenal players, especially Garrett Wilson, who was just an alien at points on the field, but they're going to be good. Jackson Smith-Njigba will be even more of an alien this year than he was last year, and just how good he is. He had 100 receptions for over 1,500 yards. We'll get more into that later. By close to a mile, Ohio State's leading wide receiver. But without further ado, I want to talk about the wide receivers that are currently committed to Ohio State. 3 of Ohio State's best top 4 players are wide receivers. So 3 out of the top 4 players are wide receivers who have been recruited by Brian Hartline. Again, his total commits and the points associated to those guys make up more than 1/4 of Ohio State's total points for their 2023 recruiting class. And Ohio State, again, second in the nation in recruiting. They have a total of 247.49 points. Of those points, Brian Hartline is attributed or given credit for 77 of them. Also, with him being the primary recruiter of 4 commits, he's responsible for close to 1/3 of Ohio State's total current commits, which is 13. 2 5-stars, which are both wide receivers, 10 4-stars, and 1 3-star. Ohio State very well, if they just get one more commit, could overtake Notre Dame for that number 1 recruiting class spot, which is interesting because both of these teams are facing off in each other's first game in the shoe. But let's first of all talk about 5-star wide receiver Brandon Inniss. 6 foot, 190. He's from American Heritage High School in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He's the number 2 wide receiver in the nation, ranked 18th nationally according to 24/7 Sports. If you take out position rankings and just rank every player, he's 18th there. He runs a 4.68 40, 4.44 shuttle, and a 30.9 vertical. Not all these stats are listed for every player, but if they're listed for one guy, I'm just going to talk about him. Brandon Inniss in 2021 had 308 rushing yards for 2 rushing touchdowns, 17 receptions for 341 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Due to some kind of injury he had to play, it forced him into playing quarterback that year, according to Andrew Ivins, a Southeast recruiting analyst, who projects Inniss to go in the first round and compares him to Jarvis Landry. So that's a big deal there. Big time commit, as he once was committed to Oklahoma and for a long time was considered a heavy USC lean. Up next, we have Carnell Tate. Carnell Tate was down to Ohio State and Tennessee, with LSU and Notre Dame also drawing some interest. It was mainly Tennessee versus Ohio State. Tennessee, much like USC with Inniss, probably had a lot of NIL offerings going on. It sounded like Tennessee was offering Carnell Tate a big sum of money to go there. Ohio State, from what I heard as well, offered him a lot also, and that plus Brian Hartline and I think Ohio State's development reputation, plus the fact that I don't know a whole lot about the NIL stuff, but Ohio State might have just straight up outbid for him, and he committed to the Buckeyes. He is 28th nationally. He's the third wide receiver nationally, and he is from IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. So 2 Florida players, 2 5-star Florida players, 2 5-star Florida wide receivers have committed to Ohio State. If that's not impressive, I don't know what is. According to Andrew Ivins, again, who also scouted Brandon Inniss, Carnell Tate is projected to be a 2 to 3 round player, the type of wide receiver that always seems to be open. And in 2019, Carnell Tate had 444 receiving yards for 5 receiving touchdowns. I don't know why any newer stats are listed, but those are the stats that I certainly see here according to 24/7 Sports. He is certainly a guy who's impressive. The fact that he chose Ohio State and went with Brandon Inniss is just, again, speaks volumes to the recruiting that Brian Hartline has done. Both of these guys are going to be a scary duo. A scary duo once they get on the field. And last but certainly not least, a guy who is a top 50 player, 50th nationally, the number 9 wide receiver, and the best player in North Carolina. So in North Carolina's backyard, and Mac Brown and his staff are amazing recruiters. That's also near Clemson, who could certainly use some wide receiver talent and some high-impact guys who could immediately start there with their weaker wide receiver core. Noah Rogers instead chose the Buckeyes over those 2 teams who are filled with amazing recruiters and do have good reputations in one way or another. In fact, Clemson's class is currently 3rd in the nation. North Carolina's is only 47th, but they had a really strong year last year, outbidding Ohio State for some guys, including an offensive lineman by the name of Zach Rice. So Noah Rogers, 6'2", 180, out of Roseville High School in Roseville, North Carolina. He's projected as a 2 to 3 round guy as well by Brian Don. And he, in 2019, had 247 receiving yards for 2 touchdowns, 591 receiving yards for 9 touchdowns in 2020. And in 2021, he had 1,432 receiving yards and 22 receiving touchdowns. So 3 top 50 wide receivers out of southern states. Ohio State, just they're killing it on the recruiting trail. These are big-time guys. They're guys that have a lot of potential, and being paired with a great guy, an elite guy, to develop them is critical. And Ohio State fans should certainly be excited. There's also 4-star Bryson Rogers, who committed to Ohio State much earlier than the former 3 that we were talking about did. He committed on April 17th of 2022. He's the 270th player nationally, 32nd wide receiver. Another Florida wide receiver. He had 645 receiving yards in 2021 with 14 receiving touchdowns and 710 receiving yards in 2020 with 11 receiving touchdowns. So Ohio State's wide receiver class is looking very impressive, and it will be interesting to see how these guys pan out in 2 or 3 years. That's for sure. And combine that again with an insane reputation, I don't know how you can't be impressed with these moves. Penn State, for a while, looked like they were going to possibly outdo Ohio State this year in recruiting, because Penn State's staff is just amazing. They're fantastic in recruiting. Their NIL program isn't even as good as Ohio State or Nebraska or even Michigan State and some other programs, and yet kids just still want to go to Penn State. partially because their NFL reputation, Franklin's charisma plays a role in it, but also the staff is just, they're good recruiters. And Ohio State they just leapfrogged them. And Ohio State now looks to have very well probably solidified that number one spot. They're still in the running for a lot of different guys I've talked about in previous videos. So their class is just, it's looking really good right now, is all I'm going to say for overall Ohio State recruiting. But going back to the reputation, the insane reputation that Brian Hartline has means this is only going to continue. I can't imagine Ohio State's going to get another 4 or 5-star, especially 5-star wide receiver this year. I mean, you already have 4 wide receiver commits. That's crazy. Maybe you'll get a 5th, but they're already pretty stacked in that area for this year. And part of the reason that they're getting so many commits is because after, your sophomore year, you can declare for the draft, and Brian Hartline is developing these players so well that they're NFL ready before their senior or even junior years, I think. So that's why Ohio State's just recruiting in quality and quantity at this position, is because of how well Brian Hartline is able to pump these guys out. I mean, it's essentially a wide receiver factory at Ohio State right now. That's why kids want to go and play there over teams like even USC, which is a hot team to follow. They're a team that is certainly on the rise, and they're a team who has a good wide receivers coach, where you're going to get a lot of catches, a lot of receptions if you get the starting role with Caleb Williams at quarterback. Tennessee is the same story too. Josh Heupel, with that UCF offense at Tennessee, really likes to pass it, and he's shown already with Hendon Hooker that he has the good quarterbacks. He has good wide receivers. So, I mean, the fact that Ohio State's outbidding teams that are rising, that are hot in recruits' minds, and that they're still developing them pretty well is overall impressive. Before we end this video, I just want to share the stats of last year's 3 main Ohio State wide receivers. Chris Olave, 65 receptions, 936 receiving yards, and 13 receiving touchdowns. He went in the first round. Garrett Wilson, 70 receptions, 1,058 receiving yards, and 12 receiving touchdowns. He also went in the first round. Jameson Williams, who you have to give credit to Alabama for fully utilizing him, realizing his potential, but you also have to give credit to Brian Hartline for helping develop him as well. When a player goes to different schools, when they're at 2 different schools, I try and give credit to both, because their time spent at one school, and if they have success at the next, I certainly think that their lessons from the previous school or what they learned certainly helped them. So I think that you have to give some credit there as well. Though again, you also have to give credit to Alabama for fully utilizing him and helping him nearly win the Biletnikoff Award, because he led most of Ohio State's wide receivers in all categories, and I think he led all of them in touchdowns and receiving yards as well. And then finally, you got Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's still at Ohio State, who had nearly 100 receptions, and he had 1,606 receiving yards for 9 receiving touchdowns. He is going to be the main guy next year. Don't be surprised if he gets close to that 2,000 receiving yard list, as he's just going to get better and better. Some argued he was the best wide receiver on the team last year. And again, I don't expect Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison, who I would have as my projected 2 starters replacing Olave and Wilson. I don't think they'll immediately be as good as Olave and Wilson. It will take time. It will take starting reps and such to get them to be that good. So Smith-Njigba is going to be targeted more. You're going to see him grow more, and it's going to be a fantastic season for that guy. So that's all I have to say for this video, just talking about Ohio State's wide receivers and Brian Hartline specifically in the realm of recruiting. Also talking a little bit about the reputation aspect of that, which all of that, of course, ties in together. If you enjoyed this little segment on Ohio State, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. I'll be doing a video on Michigan's running backs tomorrow if you want to check that out, and the following day a video on BYU and why I think they will be successful for this 2022 season. So hit the notification bell if you want to get notified when those videos are posted so you can watch them. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.